Welcome everyone. This is Carol Johnson from Mountain Youth, and we are so excited to be back with Dr. Lisa Strohman tonight for dealing with COVID-19 in a socially media-driven world. We've all been living virtually for the past 10 weeks, and we need some tips on how to navigate that. I want to give a huge shout out to Eagle Valley Behavioral Health for sponsoring this event. And I also want to introduce Jay Giordano, who is here with us tonight from Vail Valley Interpreters. Jay, would you like to say something in Spanish for anyone who has logged on and needs help getting to the Spanish audio?
Sí, por supuesto. Buenas noches, mi nombre es Jay Giordano y voy a estar interpretando el evento de esta noche para la doctora Lisa Strohman. Vamos a estar en una sala diferente, por lo tanto van a escuchar la doctora de fondo y yo voy a poder estar interpretando. Toda la gente que necesite interpretación puede pedirlo directamente desde la aplicación. Hay una forma de acceder a interpretación en español y estaremos por separado en una sala empezando en breve.
Muchas gracias, Jay. And in case you're just joining us, I'm Carol Johnson with Mountain Youth. I'm the Community Education Manager, and we are here tonight with Dr. Lisa Strohman, author of Unplug, owner of Digital Citizen Academy, and a prolific expert on social media and technology and youth and family issues. And we are so thrilled that she's joining us tonight to have a community conversation about dealing with COVID-19 in a socially media-driven world. And we're thrilled that this can be a bicultural and a biliteral event with Jay here from Vail Valley Interpretation. If you're just joining us and you need Spanish, you press the button that says Spanish. If you're an English speaker, you're automatically going to hear everything in English. So again, a huge thanks to Eagle Valley Behavioral Health and to Mountain Youth, and especially to Dr. Lisa with the Digital Citizen Academy for joining us. And at this point, I'm going to pass it over to you, Dr. Lisa. I'll see you at 5:30 for the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really want to say thank you to Carol, to Mountain Youth, to Eagle Valley Behavioral. Like, it is one of my biggest privileges, I think, to go and help parents and navigate in this space as a psychologist and someone who's really entrenched in this, also as a mom myself. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I've had a lot of conversations with students, and some of the things that I've had with them is that really to pull back and have some balance with how much they're being focused and pushed into these digital worlds, and be cautious in what areas they're going into. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the apps that are trending at incredibly high rates of where our kids are jumping in. But basically they're saying this is how we exist, and it's breathing air. And if you really talk to them about pulling them outside of these social media platforms, they really are nervous about having their own worlds like pulled away from them. And so this is their level, particularly during a quarantine, obviously, with COVID-19. So let's talk a little bit about what I think is most important is this, the social emotional stress and our needs and where we are during COVID and this pandemic. This is something that we have not seen for many, many, many years, and never in our history have we really shut down a country over any sort of pandemic. So we've got the Spanish flu that occurred in the early 1900s, but this really is the first time that we've really identified and really created a global response in terms of shutting things down and isolating people. And what I want to tell parents is that we as the parents are leaders for our kids. So I have one in elementary school, I have one in middle school now. And when I look at where our kids are, they really look to us to put their energy. So if we're stressed and we're anxious or we're frustrated, we're upset, that's the energy that our kids are feeling. So what I encourage our parents and our educators and the adults that are in this world with our kids is to make sure you take care of yourself first. So like on the airplane, when the flight attendants would say, put your oxygen mask on first and then put it on your children, it really in this scenario is so, so important that you're taking care of yourself first. Because I think that if we're not healthy mentally or emotionally, or we're having stress, I think it's really challenging for our kids to understand how to kind of mitigate their own feelings of anxiety or worry or any of those things. So, and they may not come to us. So really, really important is to do that self-care in these scenarios. I think that one of the things that I've come across multiple times across multiple different platforms are students' feelings that they were just kind of ripped out of a world that they were so invested in. So imagine that all of a sudden, and maybe some of the parents that are on the call tonight have lost their position in their job, or they've been their company is shut down, but it's instantaneous. And so for kids, like that's not part of the projected world order for them. So we've told them for many years that as you go through school, as you continue to learn, you're going to start in kindergarten, you're going to go through high school, and as a senior, then you'll graduate. And so this is a very, very awkward and uncomfortable position for them to be in, where their things are sometimes just left on the table and they had to walk out. So as schools are coming to a close and the reality is sitting in that they really don't get to go back and they're not going to be able to see their friends, there's a lot of loss and there's a lot of trauma that is kind of bubbling up to the surface. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And I think Carol mentioned this in the beginning, but that we're going to do a Q&A in the end, but there is a place for you to write in questions. If you have questions, please write them in and we will get to them. And she promises to interrupt me if something comes in and you need it addressed right away. I put this slide in here because I think it's really important to understand what the stages of trauma are. I served in the mental health corps after 9/11, which was very different than the situation in that, you know, when we have an incident that is extreme and it's one time. So, you know, as the attack on 9/11 happened on our country, you know, buildings fell down, fires were started, but we could come together as a whole to be able to respond. It doesn't mean that it's different in the sense that we have that shock and that initial paralysis, because everybody kind of comes into a traumatic event or something that's outside of our control, is probably best to put it, with that, what am I supposed to do? And is this really real? When you're talking about an ongoing trauma, so a pandemic where there's quarantining happening, it's a little bit more like a diagnosis that we don't really know what the outcome is. Like if doctors are telling us that we need to have medications that might heal it or might not heal it, it's an ongoing issue. So I think that in the initial stages, that denial stage that we see in these trauma reactions is to kind of dismiss it or pretend like it's not happening or it doesn't apply to us. And so you may have heard the news or you might have friends talking about it, but I would suspect even in your own community, you didn't instantaneously see everybody wearing masks and walking around and being extremely cautious in ways that we were told to do. And that really has to do less with people wanting to violate social norms, but are being stuck in that denial stage and kind of dismissing the realities. Then we get into this bargaining stage, typically in trauma reactions, where we kind of tend to look for what it is that we can do in order to maybe sometimes break the rules, or, you know, maybe if I don't have to put on my mask, if I'm just going to run into the gas station, but I need to use my mask if I'm going to shop at a store. We kind of try to justify our need to go to the store versus transitioning over maybe to some of the electronic, like Instacarts or Amazon grocery or some of these other things that people are doing, because we really are trying to figure out, like, what is this new normal, and are there ways that I can still keep my sanity and bargain to be in that situation so I can keep my patterns. And then the next stage is very close. Stage 4 and 5 are very close together, but anger and anxiety, which is where you see a lot of the toilet paper flying off of the shelves, or the meat being bought out at high levels, where you kind of had, that looks to me like somebody who's having an anxious or an anxiety response to this trauma because they're trying to create some control in them. So it doesn't mean that, you know, your friends are buying 16 reams of toilet paper. It means that they're, you know, there's something wrong with them, but it definitely is indicative and shows some signs of somebody dealing with a little bit of anxiety that they're having. Like I said, stage 5 and stage 4 kind of go hand in hand, but that sadness, depression, worry, you know, it doesn't have to be clinical terms, but when you have a traumatic incident, you're going to have this realization that like our normal isn't possible anymore. And there's going to be sadness and grief over that. The difference here that was in this situation, when you have an ongoing trauma, in this specific situation in a quarantine that really hasn't ever been seen in history, is the inability to center. So, you know, 9/11, somebody's diagnosis, like we come together, we hold each other, we bring food, we share with one another, and we embrace and support one another in a very emotionally touching way. And with a quarantine where you're not able to violate certain social norms and we're being really segregated from one another, it's very isolating. And so that ability to start heal and move past these feelings of either anxiety or depression, very difficult in that situation because of it. I think a lot of times the solution seeking in us, I will tell you that the nonprofits that I have worked with and the academic and educational institutions like basically skipped all of these steps and got right to solution seeking, mostly because they had to, right? These are the people and the partners that we call on and are reliant on to really be there for our children. And so I think in this situation, they got there very quickly and have to go in reverse order and kind of process their feelings later. But again, this is a stage that everybody eventually gets to figure out how we're going to solve these issues together. And then finally is the acceptance, you know, finding the way forward and really having resolution that the pandemic is here. Like we have to really figure out how we're going to address this as a community. How do we support one another and accept that this new norm will be okay? And I think one of the examples I talk about is the TSA scanning devices. Everybody was maybe irritated about it originally, and we didn't like the idea after 9/11 that we were going to have to go through and take off our belts and our shoes and all of those things. But it's kind of a normal, expected new behavior now that we all do. So I think that there's some acceptance that gets built in when we go through these things slowly and come up with solutions that everybody can kind of buy into. And I think that when we're talking about trauma reactions, I think it's very healthy to have conversations with our kids about what those could be. So, you know, pumping gas for the first time with my daughter, you know, after I was done pumping, I took one of my wipes from my car and I wiped down the handle and the pin pad. And she's like, well, why are you using one of our wipes to clean up everything? And I said, well, this is how we're going to move forward as a community together. Like we're going to have to take care of those that may not think to take care of others or take care of themselves. And so those solutions, I think those conversations create children that are very healthy and create a better transition through one of these trauma situations. So obviously, you know, what we want to do is we want to move from kind of a hopelessness state into an optimism state. And that's what's really important, particularly as adults and as parents, is giving that guide for our kids and how it comes across. So one of the things that the realities of where we are, I think everybody can agree that everybody tried to jump on to some sort of adaptation technologically. So our kids typically were given either devices at the school if they had access to them, or they were asked to log on to home computers. We were asked to, those of us that were still working, go virtual and do things via Zoom. And so the reality is that as we go through and connect, we're trying to get our things done. Our children are still trying to get our attention. So I hope then maybe some of the parents out there feel my pain in this picture, because I think right now I have a huge sticky on the outside of my door that says "Mom is live, please don't make any loud noise." So I mean, trying to figure out new norms on how do we work together when we're kind of fighting over the same resources and in the same time and using the same space. So let's look at where our kids went, because they did go academically into hopefully their educational assignments and things like that. The reality is that they, it's interesting, the reports that I get from the back end. So I work with a lot of monitoring programs that monitor the Google Suites for schools and some of the content on the back end through devices. And so it looks like we have about a 70% participation rate with kids that drop down to about a 45% participation rate on a daily basis on average. So what that means is that kids came on and about 75% of people or kids are going on and they're still participating in their schools actively. I think a lot of the schools communicated very early on that grades wouldn't be slipping, but they could be improved. And so those kids, ironically, that are the ones that are non-participants are typically our A and B students who were pretty satisfied with their grades and realized that they didn't really have to do anything because that was the policy of the school districts to do that. So some of those kids probably are a little bit higher adopters of the social media and jumping on and doing non-academic work on computers. And I think that that's important to differentiate, because when we use technology in a creative, thoughtful, engaging way, where we're able to work with others and have conversations with others, that is not something that causes me concern as an expert or worry about the psychology or the social and emotional well-being of your child. It really is what we're going to talk about now, these apps that they're jumping into and what they're being introduced to through them. So let's go over them, because I'm sure most parents know most of them. TikTok by far over the last 9 weeks has been the highest trending app that is out there. And so those of you that don't know what TikTok is, it was the old Musical.ly. It is a music-based, it has songs on it, and there's short videos that kids can post on there, trending videos. There's a lot of content on there that I'm sure you probably wouldn't want your kids to see. A lot of parents think it's pretty innocuous. I will tell you that it's a foreign-based app over in Asia. And so the information, once it leaves our home, our servers in the US and transitions over there, we don't have control over that. So some of the concerns I have are the videos that these kids might be making, mocking the pandemic, or doing things that they might think is funny with their, quote unquote, kind of cohort peer groups. But will that come back and bite them when they apply for college and it's part of their social media digital footprint? Those are some of the things that I worry about, because that can happen. Instagram obviously is always popular, far more popular now that people can't see each other. So using that platform in streaming ways as well. YouTube has had its highest level of consumption. In fact, that we had a couple of times that the server was broken with so many kids that are on there. Keep in mind that these are all programs and apps that kids are supposed to be 13 to be on with their own accounts and things like that. But there aren't any parental restrictions or sign-ins required. So there's a lot of kids that are underage on there that cause problems when I talk in just a minute about who else is on there with them. Snapchat continues to be one of the probably the best predictable apps that I can use when we work. I work with Internet Crimes Against Children units, and so the detectives often get data from Snapchat. Kids think that data disappears, however, it does not. So even on Snapchat, as they're doing their snap streaks and doing things on there, that content is still attached to their digital footprint, still used if they're posting anything in there that's inappropriate in any way. on that. WhatsApp is, again, a really great program for international usage. Like, if you're going abroad or you're using that, we've got friends who moved back home to Barcelona, and it's incredibly helpful app in communicating globally. But you do have to also remind yourself that there's no really vetting process in that. So who they're talking to and how they get the WhatsApp connection, oftentimes through these other platforms where they're like, hit me up on my WhatsApp. And then they start having these conversations that aren't typically monitored through most programs that parents are using. This is Likey. This used to be the old Like app. Oftentimes you'll see social media apps rebrand after a period of time because they had negative press. Likey is essentially an app where you put video messages out to one another, short video messages. And there was originally a way that they could brand themselves. They could brand themselves in terms of hashtags and who they liked. It was interesting. This came out and actually has been out for quite a while. And then there was a political party that came on and created their own persona on the app. And then 5 days later, the app created a parental monitoring aspect of the app. So still, again, this is highly used. Again, this one's based in Singapore actually, but we don't have access to the data once it's left our servers in the United States. YOLO is the as close to as possible, I would say, is the old Ask FM. You only live once is what it stands for. So it is it's an app that you can ask anybody anything you want. They have no idea who's asking them the question, and you get to remain anonymous for as long as you want. So as you can imagine, it's a high level area where kids can be very brave, either personally, where they're going out and asking questions of others that they may like. It gets into sexually explicit information and requests. It goes into lots of different things that bullying and mean statements. It's a great platform if you're getting into a fight with a friend that kids go on. And then House Party, which is kind of like our Zoom right now for kids. They rebranded. It used to be a solo cup, and now it is the little hand clapping. So it essentially is a group where kids can get together 8 at a time. They can go into this app, into a chat feature. There's videos of all of them, and they can either keep it private, where it's basically a house that's locked down where just your friends are allowed in, or, which is more exciting, is to go inside the app and maybe only have 6 friends go in and leave the door open and see who shows up. And so you'll see a lot of cross-pollination between different schools, innocently, to even some creepy adults that go in there. I will tell you that this is probably my most challenged area when I'm talking to parents and then talking to kids, is really getting them to understand kind of the terms of agreements that they do. This is where your kids spend a lot of their time, and they have no control over the data once it's there, and you have no control over who's in there with them. So, my world, working with internet crimes divisions and looking at the predators that are going in there and pretending to be other young children and creating these kind of longer standing relationships with your kids, trying to create a friendship so they can gain access or pictures. Those are some of the things that I spend a majority of my time dealing with and talking to parents about. Once your child has posted something on social media, you really don't have control over it after that. So when I talk to parents that are, sending their kids to the school that they like, they're really, impressed with their academics, they're getting them into sports, they're getting them into art or music, and they're trying to create this really well-rounded student. And I have seen countless times where one post, one mistake, one kind of thoughtless joke online can bring everything to a halt when we're going in and we're going into the recruiting process of colleges or looking at seeing where we're going to go next. And then the social emotional impact of it is really, really stressful. So, really right now, what I see is, parents sitting alongside kids because we're at home too. And so there's a lot of joint, kind of digital diets happening because we're all kind of stuck in one place, and we're trying to kind of reach out to the outside world. And again, this is a challenge for parents. Like, how much social do you let them have? And the platforms that might be most safe, which you have control over via like iMessage or some of the standard messaging apps that we may use, or a phone that we use as a phone, which is a novel idea to kids, isn't the way that they're using these devices. And so it's really a challenge to get them to understand the consequences of it, of what happens with it. So what I predict as we move forward is we're going to be strained with kids going back into the schools. We don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know whether or not there's going to be shifts in school and what that's going to look like. So there's a lot of uneasiness in kids' minds. And if your kids are anything like mine, they've created a picture in their head, and they're expecting to go back in fall, and they're going to go see their friends, and they're going to go into class. And I don't think it's going to look the same anymore. And I also think that because we have infused technology into the hands of our kids to create access to academics, so that we kind of prevent a massive slide. They're calling it the COVID slide, which is usually called the summer slide. But kids always lose a little bit of academics over summer. Now it's really going to be evident that we're going to lose. Some academic institutions are predicting that almost a whole grade that our kids are going to have to be kind of catching up to, which means that we've got a massive amount of work to do. And we're going to be returning to a classroom where kids aren't used to giving full attention to people talking live and being present in that moment. So some of the things that I've talked about is an expectation that you're going to see decreased test scores, and not to freak out as a parent if that's happening with your kids. It's going to be a little bit harder and challenging for them. They're going to have a lack of focus, because putting that attention and getting back into those 30 to 45-minute metrics of paying attention is going to be a challenge for them. You may have noticed this at home. I certainly have with my kids, but a lot of emotional dysregulation going on. And again, that has to do with a lot with stress, has a lot to do with like schedules are off, expectations aren't really known. And so there's a lot of change happening there. So you should be challenged through an irritable child, a child who's sad, withdrawn, things like that. The increase in anxiety because they're not really sure what to expect. And one of the things that we're seeing a lot on my end is this increased suicidal tendencies, where kids are starting to talk a little bit of hopelessness. And again, I think I don't want to normalize that behavior, but I definitely want to call attention to it, because I think that if you have a child who's expressing any sort of thoughts, behaviors, or friends are talking about it or posting about it, it's definitely something you need to intervene in right away. The lack of respect that we're seeing, this is, me as a mom coming at you and saying kids are very transparent in their emotions. And so if you're asking them to do extra around the house because you're trying to get your things done and they're used to being at school all day and this is new for them, I think you're going to see that translate a little bit into that respect piece for yourself. We are seeing increased issues of cyberbullying online, and obviously it's because they're spending more time online. What that means to you as a parent is to recognize that if their mood starts to shift or drastically changes, or they start to be withdrawn suddenly, you need to ask some questions about that, because there's probably something happening on the other end. And so I think it's important for us as parents to come together and recognize that. The inappropriate posting, that is sharing pictures of ourselves that may be clothed, unclothed, scantily clothed. Those are the pictures that I'm seeing happen a lot, as well as kind of the joke memes that kids really, really get into. But I think that a standpoint of what, some of them you have to appreciate is just them being bored. But a lot of them have to do with their need for attention, and they're not getting that sense of attention or energy from those classmates anymore. And so now we're going to go straight into summer and not be able to even come back together in big groups. It's going to be very calculated on how we start to do that. And so I think that that's going to be again, something to look out for, to have a conversation with your kids about. One of the biggest issues that kids have complained to me about is how many kids are cheating online and getting their work done by communicating with other kids and using Google Docs and sharing information and all of those things. And I would tell you as a parent, I don't think I would be too scared or freaked out right now if that was happening. I think I would have a conversation. Obviously, plagiarism and cheating and all of those things are very serious offenses. But I think that given the circumstances and the emotionally trying situation that we're all in at this time, I think that kids are kind of finding easy ways to cut corners. And so I think it'll be something to address definitely in the academic setting. But I don't think I would worry about it too much. Future implications, like these are the things that I think, again, for your questions, it's recognizing from a standpoint that we don't know what this pandemic long-term is going to do, but I would say that I would have an expectation that similar to kind of the TSA mandates that happened, we're going to have different ways that we address education. And I think that that means that if you have a kid that has been struggling with online learning, that has to be your need to start to advocate for them and let the school know that they're not a remote learner and that's not something that they're doing well at. So I think that it's important to understand that as a parent, it's really important. The other thing socially, I think, is we're going to have some trust issues coming back together. I think that, going into a store this afternoon, I noticed that I would say probably 50% of the people weren't wearing masks. I'm in Arizona, and I was really, really tentative about getting into the space with these people that just seemed so cavalier in that. And it just really made me think of the psychology of where our kids are going to be. And again, they're going to be depending on what we're saying. They're going to be depending on what their social media platforms and other kids are saying online. They're going to look to adults to feel comfortable with that. So I think that paying attention to whether or not their mental health is impacted, but understand that this has to go back to allowing themselves to be vulnerable again, and that lack of trust is probably going to be something normal, and it's a socially appropriate response. So having those conversations are going to be pretty vital moving forward. I think I touched upon this just a second ago, but academics, not all learning is equal. Some kids are auditory learners, some are visual learners, some really need that extra attention from teachers. I think we have a 50% drop in child abuse reports that have happened, but we also have a 100% drop in mandated reporters seeing kids eye to eye and in person. So I don't think that means that our kids academically may be ready to come back and really perform really well on fall assessments, because they may have been still dealing with like a parent that may have COVID or an abuse situation or a divorce that's happening. And I think that your teachers are going to be stressed. I think that there's going to be some turnover. I think that there's going to be some challenges that are going to come, but I think that we have to be a little bit thoughtful of, what is it that we're doing and how do we manage expectations academically with our kids? Not that we should expect less, but I think that we should have a little bit more patience on that. Coping strategies, I'm not going to read this. These are PDFs that I am going to send over to Carol Johnson, who will send these out to you. You all signed up through email, so I'm going to put together some PDFs or some downloads, but PDF is the terminology. This is from Challenge Success, but it's a really common one that kids need play, they need downtime, and they need some family time or fun time. So I think that these are kind of like really nice takeaways that you can use. These are, how do we look at using social media safely, checking content, talking to your friends about what's okay to post, like how do we get kids talking about this together and really recognizing it. And we were talking a little bit before this started, that I came out a couple of years ago and did a talk that was really well attended. And I think it's helpful to get the kids in the conversation, listening and supporting one another on how to support one another in this state. Finally, I think one of the things I'd like to really talk about is that we should have an expectation. This is kind of representative of fall. Then we're going to go into springtime in the end, and we're going to transition through our school year. We're going to have some expectations that our kids are going to have loss. I think, I typically have used this graphic for what I see when kids use too much gaming or social media or get into pornography or things like that. But I think it's also true for where our kids are going to come back. They're going to be a bit behind. They're going to be stressed. But what I will tell you, this is representing neuroplasticity and the ability and the magnificent power of our brains, that when we treat them well and we create love and attention and nurturing, that they will grow again and they will bloom and we will get them reconnected and they will thrive again. I think that one of the things that I'm pushing forward through my state leaders and the folks that I'm talking through, or I can talk to any of them that will listen to me, is that we really need to push the agenda of kids needing to have their social and emotional well-beings really addressed first before we can have an expectation that their academics are going to come back on space. And I think at best we might get contemporaneous and we will have to do it at the same time. But I think that we will see likely, if I'm a strong enough advocate in those groups, is like getting some resources behind that as a fundamental need for these kids, because that I think will definitely help moving forward. So I don't know if you want to jump in here, Carol, and do the questions, but I wanted to leave plenty of time. I know I talk really fast, so.
Yeah, that was fantastic. You are such a parent whisperer. We need you in our community, like, to have this once a week. But someone emailed me a question ahead of time. It's not in the Q&A, but I'll just put out there for you to get us started with this Q&A portion. And if you can't stick around for the Q&A, you are going to be redirected to a post-event survey. It's anonymous. If you could fill that out for us, it's very helpful to let us know if this event was helpful and if you learned something, and if you would recommend a chat parent at home to a friend. So my first question, and I do see a question now in the chat box.
Yeah, there's a different one.
Yeah, hang on, let me go there and I'll ask this before the one that I got emailing. So Kim asks, I have a hard time getting my 11-year-old off their iPad to do anything anymore. It's like pulling teeth to get them to go outside and do anything with family. What do you think, Dr. Lisa?
So I will tell you that I will second your frustration, because I have an 11-year-old as well. And I ended up downloading and use OurPact, OURPACT. It is a resource that I find really, really helpful, because I can lock it down from my cell phone and I can monitor it very closely, that they only have X amount of time. They only have access to certain apps that I want them to have. And so we've kind of created balance, and I've shared this before, that I think that if we can have balance in our world, so if you have screen time, you need to have like off time. So my kids are required to do some music every day. They're required to do reading every day. They're required to do exercise every day. So until those things are checked off and are set, then they have access into some of the technology. And again, it's limited. So, my balance with my 11-year-old, who tends to want to be on more than I would like, is we said that you can have 3 1-hour periods per week to do social kind of like social connections with friends, however that works on the iPad. And then other than that, then unless it's something that they're doing creatively or, learning, he's picking up guitar now. But we've created some, is very painful, I will tell you. So Kim, it's not easy if they've been having access before, but I think that you sit down and you have a family meeting, you say, all right, we're going to create new systems. And I found that app really easy myself to use. And I am not, even though I talk about technology, I'm not the technology, that part's a little bit harder for me.
Good answer. Thank you for the question, Kim. So the other question that was asked to me earlier today in advance of this event was to help a parent understand what is the difference between good screen time and bad screen time.
I think that's excellent. I think that anything that you look at that you would be worried that they're seeing. So typically what I would say is if it's kind of the junk food of technology, if you're looking at something where it is like gaming, social media, like the apps that I showed, sometimes the chat forums like YouTube, you can go down like these really crazy rabbit holes on YouTube and you start getting very interesting content very quickly. So I think that some of those things that might start out as very innocent for our kids go into these non-innocent areas. And so I think anything where you might worry that your kid doesn't have the maturity to understand that this is bad content for me or it's not good for me. It's no different than teaching your kids that they shouldn't vape or they shouldn't drink alcohol or take drugs, right? These are all things that can hurt you. And so if you have a kiddo that you think is going to push your boundary there, they're definitely going to push your boundary on technology. And they'll probably go into those areas that, like I said, that's kind of, I call it the junk food technology space.
Junk food technology space. I love it. Okay, thank you. That's a good answer. Amy Baker has asked, what is the best way to let my kids know that this is not forever, that it will change, but life is going to be different in a way that, how can I explain this in a way that my kids will really process and understand this?
So that's a really great question. I think that it depends on the age of your kiddos. But one of the things that I think is universal, no matter how old your kids are, is like to take them through the process of how maybe they had a pair of shoes that they hated, but they outgrew them and they got a new pair. So take an example in life that they've had to go through themselves, or, you know, maybe a pair of clothes that was their favorite and then they outgrew it and they had to get rid of it. And it was that change for them, that if you can take any sort of natural occurring situation in their life and overlay it into this one and say, you know, maybe a new pair of shoes or pants or whatever was better. Like, and we figured out new ways. And if we talk about how, you know, again, if they're a little bit older, you can talk about how, you know, penicillin came about and how our entire world changed because we created solutions for it. And now we have safer ways that we manage situations and health. So those are some of the things that I think if they're little, take an example that you can think of that they're used to in change and use that to apply it.
Thank you, Amy, for the question and great answer.
Great question.
So, Inez has asked, how many hours do you recommend per day as a maximum then? She's asking for an 8-year-old. Before you answer it though, I want to let everyone who's still listening know that the app we've been talking about is Our Pact, OURPACT, 2 different words. And apparently it is a subscription-based app. So let me that question again, Dr. Lisa. How many hours do you recommend per day as a maximum for an 8-year-old?
So this is really interesting. So I have this like nerdy picture that I usually show, but a developing brain for a little kid, for their frontal lobe and that gray matter, which is all their creative wiring that happens, that's kind of at the height of it. At 8 years old, here's the push. It is the average age in the United States that our kids are exposed to pornography for the first time. And it is, by 11, it's chronic viewing of pornography. And the reason why is because at 8, they're in 2nd grade, and it's their first academic assignment that puts them out into the internet, looking up historical figures and things that they're supposed to be doing. But the industry, which is like $100 billion industry, goes in and attaches and puts all of these like creepy, seek moments to it so they can do advertorials and like pop-ups and all that stuff to the kids. So when I say that I think that it's only 2 hours a day, because I think that a kid, if you think about it, 8 years old is probably going to bed, I would say probably no later than 8, thinking about, you know, how much brain like development or sleep that they need. That 8-year-old probably shouldn't have more than 2 hours, again, of like fun technology use. If they're on a device and they're writing or they're using art or they're being creative in it, that's very different than that passive junk food technology. So keep that in mind as well. But I don't think that they should be on devices doing anything that is non-academic or non-creative for more than 2 hours.
Thank you. That was a great question, Inez, and a very thorough answer, Dr. Lisa. Candace has a couple questions for us, which are really good. What are the differences, similarities of symptoms of grief versus symptoms of overload of technology on the youth brain? And then the second part to her question is, when do you seek professional support for someone if the symptoms continue?
That's a really, really great question. So they're actually pretty different. So, and let me start at the second part first. The brain, when it has overload, like technology overload, typically is a brain that's like super hyper irritated. So if you have a lot of talking back, yelling, like mood lability, or like a mood that's like kind of fluctuating, like in hyperspace, like as a parent, you kind of get that that's not a normal reaction with your kid. That typically when you have a kid who's on devices or social or things like that, it kind of gets their brain into this fight or fight mode, the flight or fight mode, which is like using that neurochemical part of our brain. So it's very irritable and very much on edge, which is what that looks like. A grief state is like what I kind of took you through on those trauma stages. And again, I think Sloan asked if we're going to send these out, and I'm going to make this a PDF and send it to you so you have reference to that. But a grief state is more really where they're going through, and you kind of see them go through depression. Like they might be a little bit anxious, but it's more worry, it's more fear, and it's more sadness or more withdrawing, versus that irritability and like kind of hyper reactions that we see when it's on technology overload. And so if you see a change, whether it's, again, like if it seems intolerable in your house, or one of the things that I call kind of a silent suffering that happens in families is that I hear a lot of families talk about things going through the walls, things getting punched, devices getting broken, things getting thrown. And I think people don't talk about it. It's almost like, back in the 70s when you had a family member that may have been an alcoholic or something, and people kind of tried to hide that. It is not something that you need to be silent about. I definitely think that if you're starting to see that there's a couple of steps you could take. You can take a step to, like we talked about with Kim earlier, it's going to be painful, but sit down, have a family meeting and say, here's where we're going to create boundaries and lines. And then if that doesn't help and you don't see a change in that, then I would say like, that's when I would start to reach out to kind of professionals and find out whether or not you can get some at least short-term assistance in like helping that mood situation.
Thanks. That's a very thorough answer. And such a great question. So important for parents to understand these differences. I love the Q&A portion of the eChat parent events. This is when we all come together as a community and break stigmas and teach each other things. So we don't have any more questions right now, unless someone wants to type something right now. I'll keep my eyes open on the Q&A in the chat. I did want to let everyone know that this event was recorded, and we will be emailing it out to everybody tomorrow as soon as the recording is ready. And I really hope you enjoyed your time with Dr. Lisa. I wish she would move here. I've invited her several times. She seems to like Arizona more. Okay, I guess I understand. Oh, we do have one more question. Okay, thank you. Is there a picture for kids to show them how technology affects their brain, or an image? And if you have a good one, Dr. Lisa, you can send it to me with the other materials, and
I will.
Make sure all the registrants get this.
Yeah, I'll add it in there for you. And again, I think going over this with your kids is important. I think now's a good time to mention, I do have that TED Talk where I talk about it. Like if they wanted to look me up with the TED Talk, if you look TED Talk Lisa Strohman, you'll find it. I talk about the brain in there, and that's like 18 minutes long. So if your kids are old enough, I do show, I believe that the image is in there, but I will send it in the PDF as well.
That's how I found you initially, was that TED Talk. I was doing just a Google search on technology, youth, family presentations, and you came up, and I was like, we need to bring her to Vail.
That was awesome. Yeah, I love it up there. You guys have a really great community, and I think that it's unfortunate the circumstances of why it came up, and sadly it happens kind of in other communities, obviously, where we have like, situations where kids are starting to listen to each other with negative thoughts and comments, but this is their world, and so it just happens so fast online.
Well, since you came in the fall of 2018, our mental health conversations have grown leaps and bounds. A lot of that is due to the support from Eagle Valley Behavioral Health. I'd like to give them another shout out for supporting eChat Parent at home and all the eChat Parent series events. We're so grateful to them. And I don't see any more questions. So oh wait, yeah, there's another question. Hold on. Does Our Pact also work for Chromebooks?
That's a great question. I'm not sure about that. I would think that it does, because I think that they have it in both the Google and in the iCloud store, the App Store. So I think that it does, but I'm not 100% sure because we only have the one family iPad that we use. So you'll have to check that out. If it doesn't work, again, please, this is why I put my information up there. I try to be as accessible. My website, drlisastrohman.com, I have a contact form. So if you have trouble, again, this makes me happy to help other people. So if it doesn't work and you need other help, then let me know and I'll try to find a solution for you on that.
Candace Eves, who's on the event with us tonight, is letting me know right now that the district does monitor the school issued Chromebooks. So that's good to know.
So Candace, one of the questions I would ask is you need to find out whether or not those Chromebooks are monitored after they leave the campus. Because most districts that I work with, those Chromebooks only are monitored while they're on the district server on campus. But when they go home, they often are not monitored. And typically the kids don't tell the parents that. So I would check into that part yourself.
I think she's responding to me right now. In the meantime, there was—
I love Go Guardian, yeah.
Yeah, another suggestion from Amy about Go Guardian being helpful for monitoring. So for the spelling, check the chat box for those of you who are still on the line. And Candace, I'm waiting for Candace's response on checking about the Chromebooks after they leave the campus. Because yeah, our district generously offered Chromebooks to everybody. And
that's amazing. And it looks like they do monitor them. Yeah, I think Candace, that's a great point. I think that again, like we have to give kids, this is my whole spiel, is if we empower the kids to understand why they have to make the good choices, they try to make good choices. If we don't educate them on the need to make those good choices and we just kind of hand them devices and monitor them, like we're not really helping them. It's, to me, like handing the keys to a car to a child without any driver's ed. So that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
I love your analogies, Dr. Lisa. Okay, we do have another question from Heather. What are the mental and emotional challenges to confiscating devices versus shutting off devices after an allowable time?
That's a great question. It could be the sanity of the parent. It could be, again, this goes back to having a really solid contract and understanding with your kids. If they're little kids, like younger than the age of 5, it's really hard to get them to understand what an agreement is or contract is. The minute they hit school, those rules are really in place. So preschool age kids and above can really understand very simplistic terms of these are our agreements and this is what we agreed to. And so I think that once they get to that age, you're okay to have a conversation and expectations. But I think as a parent, I think that I always tell parents that when we have little kids, we have expectations. And when we have older kids, we have to move ourselves into the world of acceptance. So we have to accept that our kids are going to continue to make choices that they're doing when they become 17, 18, 19, right? Like they're going to start making those choices on their own. They're outside of our control anymore. But when they're younger, I think what you really need to have an understanding is that their frontal lobe isn't fully developed. And so you're going to have to make those choices for them. And if you're able to say, these are what we agreed to, if you go over it, it turns off. That's why I like that device, Our Pact, because it gives the kids like a little kind of simple graphic and it tells them how much time they have left. So they have to learn how to manage their time. I think that that's really good and instructional and educational. It's been really good for my 11-year-old to understand that. So I think that it saves you a lot of the yelling and screaming and fighting. I tell parents all the time, never get into a fist fight to get a device out of a kid's hand. If you ever get to that point, I always say, go to your internet service provider and just shut everything down from the server level, because it really is going to be counterproductive for you if anything escalates from an emotional aspect for you and your child.
That makes so much sense. Thanks for the question, Heather. So I just want to remind everyone, you're going to be redirected to a post-event survey. It's anonymous. Your feedback is really helpful to Mountain Youth. It helps us shape future events and know if we did a good job. And My guess is you're all going to want Dr. Lisa to come back. So I don't see any more questions at this point. I'm going to thank Jay for interpreting from Vail Valley Interpreters, and thank everyone for attending. I appreciate it. I know it's a beautiful night out there, so thanks for being online with us for the past hour. And thank you so much, Dr. Lisa. We're so grateful for your expertise and your willingness to partner with Each Chat Parent and Mountain Youth.
Of course, I always will be here.
Oh, great. Okay, thanks everyone.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Okay, good night.